Okay. I'm sorry to say we didn't have a bigger stage, but presenting an icon is nevertheless a moment of goosebumps. I'm standing here and introducing Jamaica Kincaid, who I sincerely hope is on her way. Yes, she is. Give her a warm round of applause. Oh, goodness.
Does it work?
Yes, it does work. You just said, oh my goodness, did I write all these books? And I can assure you, you did.
Thank you.
It's an impressive production and a very important piece of literature.
Thank you.
That we will have the privilege to discuss with you.
Are you sure you can hear me?
If you hold the mic a little bit closer and a little bit like this.
Okay.
Perfect.
This. Okay, I'm not used to holding microphones. Thank you.
So, very much welcome. As you can see, you have a large Swedish audience that are excited to listen to what you have
I am
to say.
Very grateful, very surprised, but very grateful. Thank you.
Just to warm up a little bit, how has the book fair been so far?
Absolutely great. I mean, to think that in such a small country there's such enthusiasm for books. I mean, yeah, maybe literature only thrives in small places. It's been exquisitely encouraging. I feel I ought to just go home and write a book, but maybe that will be the book that will make you say, what were we thinking? Why did we like her? This terrible book she ran home to write. Goodbye.
We'll talk more about the terribleness of your production, but I also wanted to ask, did you by any chance go to a feminist dinner party?
I did last night. Did you? Were you there?
I wasn't. I wish I was a fly on the wall.
I wish you were.
But I read about it. It was 39 more or less icon feminist writers.
I guess so. I hadn't thought of myself as a icon material because I usually say the thing that no one wants to hear. Let me see. What did I say that I think must have made everyone? Well, because everyone, talked about the terrible things the men in their families had done to women. And so I said to them that I was very grateful to finally hear so many white women say how barbaric white men had been. I don't think it went over very well. Because though they think they're saying terrible things about the patriarchal men, they also are not admitting the terrible things these men have done to the rest of us, women and men who don't look like them. And so I thought it's in a way always what's wrong with white women and feminism, because you often feel that white women just want to do the same things that white men have done, and they feel left out of the pleasure of cutting up people's lives, invading people's lands and enslaving them. They feel left out of that. Why can't we do that? And in fact, that was one of the painful things in the women's movement after the abolition of slavery, white women realized that black men could vote and they couldn't, and there was a deep racist split in the movement, the early movement for women's rights. They were strong abolitionists until they realized that abolition meant freedom, a certain amount of freedom for black people, and more freedom for black men than they had. And they soon really joined to the white men. The role of white women in continuing Jim Crow and racism in the United States is only now being well examined. But last night was a bit like that, you know, it was all about how terrible their grandfathers, the room was mostly white women, and they talked about how terrible the men in the family had been. So I had to point out to them that, yeah, we know how terrible the men in your family have been. They've been terrible to us. We've been telling you. I don't think they liked that, especially since I call the actions barbaric. White people don't like to think of themselves as barbaric.
It is. That's so amazing to hear you say that, and I'm so glad that you were there and I was not, because that's one of the Achilles heels of the whole feministic struggle.
Yes, yes.
And I'm happy to see that we now have a more intersectional analysis, and that the academia that you also, in a sense, represent has taken huge steps just the last few years,
yes,
in this analysis.
Yes, yes.
But definitely still there is so much to be done, and the representation issue is huge. So well, thank you for being there.
Yes, well, I mean,
for
I
saying
think
it like it is.
We often think of freedom and acts of liberation as limited to our group, but really we should always, I think, when we think of justice and injustice, of course you begin with yourself, but then you always have to look beyond, because if you don't, in the end, you're defeated. Your freedom is everybody else's also. You act, I think, though I should tell you I'm very much, especially in my writing, I very much believe in the individual. I believe that in fact, the individual is more important than the group, but I also know the individual cannot survive without the group. So, yes, I'm caught between.
And to fast rewind then from yesterday evening to the beginning of your when you started your writing, when you discovered that you were a writer. How did that go about, and what happened?
Oh gosh, talk about luck. Well, I was a great reader as a child. As most writers are, they love to read, and it turns out that if you love to read, one of the things you will love to read is your own writing. Though in my case, I only love to read my writing when I'm writing it. When I'm not writing it, I have no interest in it at all. How did I come to write? I was sent to America by my parents to be a servant, and while being a servant, I went to school at nights and studied photography. But I began to write out the photographs, the scenes of the photographs. Even if they were candid, I would have a verbal image of them before I clicked. And one day I was in a college, I'd somehow gotten myself to a college from being a servant to a college student within 3 years, I think, in New Hampshire, a school in New Hampshire that doesn't exist. It's burnt down miraculously. But there is a picture of me at that school, so it's, I like to think I just dropped out of the sky. But anyway, I left the school, went to New York and declared myself a writer, changed my name, which was terribly significant, it turns out. And through one accident or the other, I was introduced to the editor of the New Yorker magazine and started to write for it. And
but it's so amazing to hear you talk about these things, because you sound so modest, and it sounds like you just, one accident led to another. But on the other hand, this extremely bold and courageous person emerged from this yet modest, easy-does-it person that you also describe yourself as a young woman in this mesmerizing context of, because you also entered the sort of absolute intellectual top from the beginning at a very, very young age. You must have been very, very confident in a way.
Well, I don't know that I was confident. There are a number of things. I once, as a child, I had to write many things as for punishment. And one of the things...
closer.
Oh, sorry. Yes. One of the things I had to write 1,000 times in as a punishment for something I had done. I was always misbehaving in class, mostly because I was the youngest person in the class and usually the smartest person. So I finished my work and then I would disrupt the class. So I was always being punished, and the punishment was usually write this 1,000 times. And what I had to write 1,000 times over and over again was, ignorance is bliss. It's folly to be wise. And imagine telling, yes, think about it. It's folly to be wise. Well,
that's crazy.
It's crazy.
Both within the walls of a school and also as a punishment.
Yes, it's folly to be wise, because I was considered a wise ass, you know. So it's was folly. But it brings me to the how I got to be a writer. You say that the top of the intellectual world is I had no idea. I was ignorant of this world. I had no idea that the New Yorker was an important magazine, or the editor was the most important editor of literature in certainly the last half of the 20th century. I had no idea that I was black and so I shouldn't be in these places, or that people were being racist. I actually didn't know what racism was, so when people were racist to me, I just thought they were badly brought up. I didn't know what to do with it. So in a way, that ignorance was a kind of bliss for me. I just showed up, and everything people would say, well, do you want to do this? I'd say yes, even though I couldn't do it at all. I just thought, well, yes. And it wasn't that I had confidence. The world I came to occupy, including my present now, I had no idea of it, so I couldn't have any fear of it. It wasn't that I didn't think I actually thought I will fail at everything I do, but I do it anyway. I've never thought of failure as something to be afraid of. I fail all the time, but I just do something else when I fail at it. So it's not that I have confidence. I'm just not. I wasn't brought up to have a career. I wasn't brought up to have an expectation that that or you. I still, even after all these years, it might sound modest, and I would want to be modest, but it really is just the way I am. I am surprised that these books, though I've written these books, though I have to say, especially, they're beautiful. They're beautifully done.
Speaking of your books, this is the latest book that has been published now in Sweden at the eminent publishing house Tranan. So please run after this conversation down and grab a copy. And it is actually about your father.
Yes, I write primarily what you'd call autobiographical, and in the United States, when a woman writes from her life, especially a black woman, the idea that it's autobiographical, that it's based on her life, is usually a reason to diminish the importance of it, to not take it seriously, because it's just her stupid black life. Whereas when men do it, it's considered really kind of grand and wonderful, and isn't it clever? But I have never let that criticism interfered with what I wanted to write. I write primarily of events that I have experienced, or events that I realize I am from. I am descended from slaves. I'm descended from women. I'm descended from certain kinds of men. So I write about them. So that book, it's actually the name of my actual father, Potter, but it's not the name on my birth certificate, because I was an illegitimate child, and when I was growing up in the colonial system, if you were your parents were not married, your father's name was not on your birth certificate. So the column where your father's name should be, I had a line drawn through it. And when you draw a line under something, it means it's finished. It's it doesn't count, really. There's a phrase. He had a line drawn through him, meaning he's dead. So I was born with a line drawn through me, a paternal line drawn through me. So I wrote about a person. Little bit I knew of this man, Mr. Potter. But then also about a certain kind of man whose inheritance would be his. He's sort of trapped in, and this is another thing, the individual in African American society is often lacking or lost. It's really the group experience, the individual in the group experience. But I like to think that even every member of every oppressed group has a unique interior. And I like to examine the interior of the characters I am thinking of, myself, my mother, my father. I've never written about my children, really, because I don't really know them.
That's interesting. Oh, and because it has many political layers, as you said, and also as a reader and someone who has been following your writing, this was very much anticipated, since the portrait of your mother is much more present through the decades, and she plays such an important role in both the shaping and forming of you as a writer and as a woman, and also of the, as we mentioned, the political layers of your story. Could you please say something about her?
You know, I once casually said early on in my career writing life that my mother wrote my life, and the way there are many ways to approach that statement, but one of them would be many explanations for that, but one explanation would be my mother was a great reader herself, and I was an only child, and she would take me to the library with her, and she would read, but I was annoying and wouldn't allow her to read in peace. So she taught me to read, but she taught me to read without telling me that there was something called the alphabet. And she just taught me to read it with words. These are the words. And for some reason, I remember the experience as the words leaping off the page and into myself. I just could feel, I knew them. And when I got something wrong and she corrected me, I never made that mistake again, and I could somehow apply it to the new words. The book she taught me to read from was a biography of Louis Pasteur, and and I remember her telling me that when I boil your milk, it's to pasteurize it, and it comes from him. I remember that very well. But so in that way, she and I were bonded with words. Anyway, by the time I was 3.5, I could read just about anything and became even more of a nuisance because I was interested in these books. So she sent me to school, but you could only go to school if you were 5. And I remember her saying to me, now if they ask you, say you're 5. And so I would consider that my first interaction with my mother, and fiction is how, so you can see how closely words, writing, fiction, the mind really is connected to her. And so because she sent me to school, you know, I was in school with 5 and 6-year-olds. I was only 3.5, but I could outread them. I could outdo them. This is what led to the punishments with words. But the first book we had to they were reading was about a farmer, and his name was Mr. Joe, and he had a dog named Mr. Dan, and a cat named Miss Tibbs, and a hen named Mother Hen, and Mother Hen had 12 chicks. 11 of them were yellow little chicks, and the 12th one was a little bigger, and he was completely black. And he was always getting in trouble. His mother was very worried about him. All of this you now can see is so symbolic, but at the time I didn't understand it, but I knew it was memorable and it was interesting. And Percy, the black chick, he always wanted to fly up to the highest bar of the fence, and his mother would say, don't do that. And one day he succeeded in doing it, and of course he fell down and broke his leg. And the sentence I remember is, Percy the chick had a fall. Well, a little later in my school life, I was 7 years old when I did something wrong again and disturbed the class, and the punishment was to copy books 1 and 2 of Paradise Lost by John Milton. And I would say that that was my first experience with interpretation or analysis. I connected Percy the chick and Lucifer. And my writing is very much, a lot of it involved with issues of transgressing. And all of that you can see leads back to my mother. So
this is so interesting. Now you are a professor of literature.
I am, yes.
And the way you tell the coming of age in a very early stage, when you were 3.5, and it's so extremely, in a physical, almost biological sense, linked to your mother.
Yes,
and
it is.
her sort of feeding you these words and creating you as an intellectual individual.
Yes.
in this early. There are so many theories about this when you read about feminist literature, etc. So it's interesting to hear your bodily experience.
Yes,
of this.
I did experience it in this.
And also all these punishments, because obviously you must have been subversive. You must,
yes.
You must have spoken truth to power, and you must have been obnoxious to someone.
Yes. I think adults, my teachers found me frustrating because they were always very proud of me, and then I would do something to make them hang their heads, you know. My reports were always, she's a wonderful student, unfortunately, and it would make my poor mother so ashamed that I didn't behave perfectly. But you know, so to go back to the reading of Paradise Lost, is when I met the character of Lucifer, who was favored, as I don't know if you know the great, so when I met that Lucifer, whose name is really means morning light. He's the first light, you know, and his rebellion. I completely identified with it. To this day, I read Paradise Lost all the time and find particular things in it, and it's led to me incorporating it in I teach a class on the garden. Literature and the garden, and it's wonderful to bring it in this new way, as you know, a part of garden literature. It does take place in.
And speaking of garden, can you please mention something about your own garden?
My own garden, yes.
What are you doing in your garden?
Oh, well, right now, putting it to bed, as we say. It's done its thing, and its frost is coming. I don't think we've had one in Vermont where I have a garden, but it's. I was given again ignorance, you know. I was given some pretend garden tools for my first Mother's Day as a Mother's Day present. And I went out into the yard and dug it up and planted the seeds that came with this present. And of course, nothing happened. Well, all I need is for encouragement is discouragement. So I naturally had to pursue this gardening. And I started to just dig up and put in and read. And the next thing I know, I was in the mind of your great Linnaeus. I have a special fondness for him, and I know all his racist theories and so on. But you know, he taught me something that I could see is rather universal. That almost everything good we humans do, we soon find its opposite, the bad part of it, and we do the bad part of it more than we do the good part of it. And so naturally, once he found out organizing and selecting and so on, he would discover racism, yes.
But the thing I was thinking about was also the poem that provoked you so much when you were younger,
again, a poem,
and what you decided to do about it in your garden.
Yes, again, going back to my childhood and my education, I had to, all across the Anglo-colonial world, an education at a certain age, you'd have to memorize a poem by William Wordsworth about daffodils. I wandered lonely as a cloud. And almost none of us would ever see a daffodil because it's not native to our climate, or it does not only not native.
This was in Antigua.
It was in Antigua.
You had never seen
I'd never seen a daffodil.
But yet you had to recite the poem by heart.
By heart. Not just me. You can go ask a person growing up in India at a certain time, parts of Africa, in the whole Anglo-colonial world. I wandered lonely as a cloud is something you had to know. And I decided, I think I was about 10, that this was a terrible... my mother was very political, so I understood all sorts of things that perhaps a 10-year-old isn't usually acquainted with. In any case, I thought I should not have known about this poem, and I decided never to have anything to do with it again. Then as I not only gardened, but as I matured in my thinking, I thought, but Wordsworth it's not Wordsworth's fault, and it's not the daffodil's fault. So I set about, and it happens with many things. I set about planting 10,000 daffodils on my lawn, and I now have more than 10,000. But every spring when they bloom, I recite the poem as I stand among them. I have pictures of, sometimes we have champagne parties reciting, and there are many things like that, I think, that have to be rescued from the horrible history they've been placed in. I grow cotton as an ornamental to redeem cotton from the thing people like me are so associated with: slavery and cotton, slavery and sugarcane, slavery and rice. You have to just sort of reconnect ourselves to the beauty of these things and remove from them the acts which have been to which the crime to which they too have been employed in. So yes, sometimes I have redemption.
I think that's such a wonderful, inspirational example of taking something that has sort of created a pain
yes,
within your chest,
yes,
and manifesting it in
yes,
in your own backyard.
Yes, yes, yes. It's wonderful to think that the daffodil. I see the daffodil the way he sees it now. It brings extraordinary joy and hope. It's spring. I love living in 4 seasons, and I might as well love it very much, because soon there'll only be 3, and maybe there'll be none.
Some people consider you one of the people that is mentioned when one's talk about the Nobel Prize. I was just about to ask you, is that a bliss or a curse? And I can see from your face it's more of a curse.
It's just the most amazing thing. I've never thought of it. I don't know why it's brought. In America, they have conversations about who should get it. Should Bob Dylan? I was very happy about Bob Dylan. I love Bob Dylan. I really love. I play Bob. Anyway, but I think since it's such a desirable thing, it should just be given all at once to all the people who want it, so they can be out of the misery of longing for it. And those of us who are not even thinking about it, but thinking about writing, because it's writing, it's not a prize. Good writers usually end up in jail or murdered or something. They don't get prizes. So, it's not something I am... Yes. Does it come with a huge amount of money? Because I need a new roof.
It does. So maybe you should.
Okay.
Maybe you should consider it.
All right. A new roof.
I'm thinking, as you said in the beginning, something about terrible, and there is in your writing, in your whole production, there is something that is also linked to that, and I think that might be one of the reasons for considering you as a Nobel Prize winner, because you're subversive in the word sense, in the sense of the word that is most like genuine. You're not vain in your writing. You're trying to reveal things that are both sincere and provocative, could be, and beautiful at the same time.
I hope so, but I didn't think anyone would notice. One of the things that makes me write is funny, is I think, well, no one will read this, so I might as well say what I want to say, because it's not going to be liked. I mean, I don't assume I'll be liked or read at all. But so the reason, for me, writing has a kind of holiness to it, a kind of divineness to it. You can't just write. You have to really. It's it's worth dying for. I often say, and I think people don't take me seriously, and I hope the devil doesn't hear this, but sometimes when I'm writing and I can't complete a sentence because I can't find the right words, and I know that if the devil came along and say, your soul, and I'll give you the words, I would say here. That's what I think about writing. It's the most divine thing. I can't believe I get to do it, and so therefore I'll do it quickly before someone takes it away from me. But it's not for prizes. The great writer, I mean, the Apostle Paul, or you think of all the great writers who, they just wrote, and then the Apostle Paul, I know you might not, I don't like his writing at all, but I like that he wrote, and all the people he wrote for are dead or forgotten, but I still read him.
Do you write every day?
No, gosh, no, I would die if I wrote every day. I write, it takes me a long time to, because a sentence has to have the right set of balances and words and surprises and tangents. No, I couldn't do it every day. Sometimes I do it intensely for a few months, and then I read a lot of garden catalogs. I bankrupt myself by ordering plants. It's true.
It's
true.
The daffodils.
It's the daffodils. Yes.
Because I heard you talk about your writing process as you were. Now you're using the word sacred, and it sounds tranquil in a way, but also sincere and very demanding.
It's difficult, It's very. It's very. The last book I wrote, which I think has been translated already, about a family in New England. Well, I had to think a lot about the names of them, and so, for instance, the boy in the family, his name is Heracles, not Hercules, and I had to sort out why that. I had to know why that would be so. Well, Hercules is a character, a cartoon character, but Heracles is the Greek god or son of Zeus, and so. But if you don't know that, you'll think, oh, it's just a stupid name. But I know why he's named that, and I know why the girl is called Persephone, because she lives in the dark pocket of her father, as opposed to underground. Everything is very significant and well thought out. So I could have written a book about the one name, I think. But I don't want to write a book about the one name. I want to know why I am using that name. So the family in this book, See Now Then it's called, and everyone thinks it's about a divorce, but it's really about the notion of time, and I tried to understand what time might be, and came to the conclusion that time was the ultimate social construct. Because time is indifferent to what we call time. What is time, anyway? But you see how necessary it is to create the thing called time. Johannes said I had to be down here by 10:45. If we didn't have 10:45, I would be upstairs listening to Bob Dylan.
And the thing is that we are actually also running out of time at this stage. But before we finish, could you please, we started off by talking a little bit about the feminist struggle, and one of the themes this book fair is gender equality. Could you give some kind of send-off words to the younger generation and perhaps aspiring female writers who wants to move forward in the world? What do you think is the most important area of struggle right now?
Oh, well, certainly to write, to always be truthful. And women have been so confined and in what they can do physically and what they can write about. And it's perhaps a very good thing for the world to know what we women, what our lives are like, that for us, a great part of our life, every 28 days, most of us bleed. That's a fact. We have something called a period, and it's a completely natural thing, but we are often made ashamed of it. The lives of women, the way our actual lives work, it would be good to truthfully present it, not as a romance or an adventure, but just the fact of it, and to do it without fear. But if it makes people want to hurt you, do it anyway. Remember, we're all going to die. It's one of the reasons I would never kill anyone, because they're going to die anyway. But just to be truthful and to not think of it as a career, as something you must do, even though you need a new roof and you need new sheets or you need food, but to do it with, do it because it must be done. It's something our lives must be lived, and they must be lived with integrity, with decency, with honesty, with compassion, and yes, with love. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you.